"Dad, can I eat with you just this once?" The words shouldn't have mattered. Not in a place like this. Not in a room filled with people who measured power in centuries in silence. But they did. They cut through the low hum of polished voices and clinking crystal like something fragile and dangerous. And suddenly every head turned, every breath slowed, because the boy standing at the edge of table 7 did not belong there, his small shoes damp from the rain outside, his thin jacket clinging to his shoulders, his eyes fixed only on one man, Lucian Voss, the one no one approached unless summoned, the one who had not shared a table, a meal, or even a glance of warmth in over 100 years. And yet here was a child calling him dad like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emily Carter froze mid-step, the tray in her hands trembling just slightly as she took in the scene. She had worked 3 shifts already, her feet aching in shoes that were half a size too small, her mind focused on tips and rent and getting through the night. But something about the boy made everything else fall away because she didn't see power, she didn't see danger. She saw hunger, quiet, aching hunger, the kind she knew too well, the kind that didn't come from missing one meal, but from being forgotten at every table that mattered. "Sir, you can't be here," the manager hissed as he rushed forward, reaching for the boy's arm, but the boy didn't move, didn't even blink. His gaze locked on Lucian as if nothing else in the world existed, as if the answer to that one small question could decide everything. The room tightened, invisible lines drawn between rules and consequences, between what was allowed and what would never be forgiven. And still Lucian did not speak, his posture perfectly still, his expression unreadable, eyes like cold steel watching something no one else could see. Emily felt her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something stubborn rising in her chest, something that refused to let the moment break the way everyone expected it to. Before she could stop herself, she set the tray down, stepped forward, and gently pulled a chair beside her. "You can sit here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow louder than anything else in the room. The boy hesitated, just for a second, then moved toward her, small hands clutching the edge of the table as if it might disappear. Emily slid her own plate in front of him, ignoring the sharp inhale from the manager, ignoring the weight of 100 eyes. "Eat," she said, and when the boy took his first bite, something shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a current passing through the air, like a story changing direction in real time. And across the table, Lucian Voss leaned back ever so slightly, his gaze no longer on the room, no longer on the rules, but on the child who had just dared to ask him for something he had denied for centuries. And for the first time, something behind his eyes flickered, not anger, not authority, but something far more dangerous, something that felt almost like memory. The bite should have been ordinary, just bread and warmth and a moment of quiet. But it was not, because the instant the boy swallowed, the air shifted in a way Emily could not explain, like the temperature had dropped by 10 degrees, and every light in the room dimmed without actually flickering. Conversation stopped completely, not faded, not slowed, but cut off as if someone had pressed a switch. And Emily felt it then, that strange pressure she had noticed earlier but ignored, heavier now, pressing against her chest, making it harder to breathe. She looked down at the boy, Ethan. She realized someone had whispered his name, and saw something she did not expect. Not fear, not panic, but relief, soft and fragile, like this simple act of eating at someone else's table meant more than it ever should. "You should not have done that," the manager said under his breath, his voice tight, but he did not step closer this time. None of them did, because across the table Lucian Voss had finally moved. Not much, just the slight tilt of his head, the slow lift of his gaze. From the boy to Emily. And it was enough to stop everyone in place. His eyes were not cold anymore. Not entirely. There was something else there now. Something searching, something that made Emily's fingers curl against the edge of the table without her realizing it. "Where did you get that bread?" One of the guests murmured, but no one answered, because it was not the bread they were reacting to. It was her. Emily felt it before she understood it. The way the room seemed to lean toward her, the way those sharp, inhuman eyes tracked every small movement she made. And for a second, doubt crept in. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe this was not just a child and a meal. Maybe she had stepped into something far larger than she could see. But then Ethan looked up at her, crumbs still on his lips, and smiled. A small, unguarded smile that did not belong in a room like this. And the doubt vanished, replaced by something steady, something unshakable. She reached for a napkin and gently wiped his mouth, the motion simple, automatic, the kind of care no one had shown him here. And that was when it happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. A ripple moved through the room, like a silent wave, and several guests straightened at once, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something sharper, something closer to recognition. "It is reacting," someone whispered, barely audible. Emily frowned, not understanding, but Lucian did. His hand tightened ever so slightly against the armrest of his chair, the movement subtle but controlled, as if he were holding something back. His gaze dropped to his son again, watching the way Ethan leaned closer to Emily, the way he stayed near her instead of retreating. And something in that image did not fit with the world he had built, the rules he had followed for centuries, the distance he had enforced. "You fed him without asking," Lucian said finally, his voice low, steady, but carrying through the entire room. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze before she could stop herself, her heart pounding once, hard, but her voice did not shake. "He was hungry," she said, simple, honest, and completely wrong for this place, eh? Pause followed, long enough that it felt like the entire night balanced on that single moment, and then Ethan spoke again, quieter this time, almost like he was afraid the moment might disappear. "Can I stay here?" he asked, not to the king, but to her. And that was the second break, the deeper one, because he did not ask for permission from power, he asked for permission from kindness, and Lucian saw it, felt it, the shift he could not control, the way his son chose her without hesitation, and for the first time in a very long time, the rules he had trusted began to feel uncertain. Emily did not answer right away, not because she was afraid, but because something about the question felt heavier than it should have. The boy was not just asking for a seat. He was asking to belong. And that was something she understood too well. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table before she gave a small nod. "You can stay," she said softly, and the words settled into the room like something fragile and irreversible. Ethan exhaled, a quiet sound, almost like he had been holding his breath for years. And then he leaned a little closer to her. Not touching, just close enough to feel safe. And that was when the tension shifted again, sharper this time, more dangerous, because across the room several figures stood at once, their movements controlled but urgent, their eyes no longer curious but calculating. "My lord," one of them said, addressing Lucian with careful respect, "this is not appropriate." The words were polite, but the meaning beneath them was not. Emily felt it, even if she did not understand it. The way the air seemed to press in again, heavier now, like a storm, building just out of sight. But Lucian did not look at them. He did not acknowledge the interruption. His attention remained fixed on the scene in front of him, on the way his son stayed near the human girl, on the way she treated him without hesitation, without fear, without knowing what he was supposed to be. And that was the problem. That was what made this moment impossible to ignore. "He asked to sit," Emily said quietly, before anyone else could speak again, her voice steady despite the weight of the room. "And I said yes." It was not defiance, not exactly, but it was not submission either. It was something simpler, something that did not belong in a place built on power and distance, and that made it far more unsettling. The man who had spoken before took a step forward, his expression tightening. "You do not understand what you are interfering with," he said, but Emily met his gaze, not boldly, not challenging, just honestly. "He is a child," she replied, and for a second, just a second, no one had an answer for that, because the truth was too simple, too direct. It cut through all the layers they had built around themselves, and Lucian saw it, felt it the way her words reached something deeper than any argument ever had. His hand loosened against the armrest, the tension in his posture shifting into something else, something uncertain, something that had no place in the role he had held for centuries. Ethan glanced between them, confusion flickering across his face, as if he could sense the change but did not understand it. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly, the question small, almost lost in the silence. And that was the third break, the one that reached further than the others, because it was not about rules or power, It was about fear, the kind that made a child believe kindness could be a mistake. Emily shook her head immediately, her voice gentle. "No, you did nothing wrong," she said, and she meant it, every word, and something in a way she said it made Ethan relax just a little more, made him take another small bite of food, as if he finally believed he was allowed to stay. And that was when Lucian stood, the movement smooth, controlled but final. Every eye in the room snapped to him. Every presence stilled, waiting, expecting correction, command, restoration of order, but he did not speak right away. He looked at his son, really looked at the crumbs on his plate, at the way his shoulders had dropped, at the faint hint of warmth in his expression. And then he looked at Emily, at the human girl who had changed the entire balance of the room without even knowing it. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than anyone expected. "Leave us," he said, not to her, but to everyone else. And this time, no one argued. The room did not empty all at once. It unraveled, slowly, carefully, as if every person present understood that leaving too fast might shatter something fragile that had just begun to form. Chairs slid back without sound. Footsteps softened against the polished floor, and one by one they disappeared, though not a single pair of eyes left without casting one final glance at the table where everything had changed. Emily stood very still, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the table, unsure if she should move or speak or simply breathe. Because the weight in the air had not lifted, it had shifted, narrowed, focused entirely on the three of them, Lucian, Ethan, and her. And now that the room was quiet, truly quiet, the silence felt different, less like pressure and more like something waiting to be understood. Ethan took another bite, slower this time, as if savoring it, as if he was not just eating food but holding on to a moment he had never been given before. And Emily watched him, something tight in her chest, loosening with every small movement he made, until she became aware of the presence across from her, closer now, undeniable. Lucian had moved, not in a way she had seen, but in a way she felt, the space between them shorter, the distance no longer protected by a crowd. She looked up and found him standing beside the table, not towering, not threatening, just there, and somehow that made it harder to steady her breathing. "You gave him your meal," he said, his voice low, measured, but without the sharp edge it had carried before. Emily nodded slightly, her fingers brushing against the empty plate. "I could get another one," she replied, simple, practical, the kind of answer that belonged to her world, not his. And for a moment he said nothing, his gaze shifting from her to Ethan again, watching the way his son sat at the table, as if it were something new, something rare, he has never asked before. Lucian said quietly, almost to himself, and there was something in that statement that felt heavier than anything that had happened so far. Emily frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in disbelief. "Never," she repeated, and when Lucian met her eyes again, there was no anger there, no pride, just a truth that did not need explanation. Ethan paused mid-bite, his small hands stilling as he looked between them, as if he could feel the shift in the conversation, even if he did not understand it. "I thought I was not allowed," he said softly, and that was the moment everything settled into place, not as a shock, not as a revelation, but as something that had always been there, waiting to be seen. Emily felt it in the way her breath caught, in the way her voice softened without effort. "Who told you that?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Without needing to hear it, Ethan did not respond right away, his eyes drifting back to the table, to the food, to the space between them, and that silence said enough. Lucian's posture shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, as if something inside him had been forced to move, to adjust, to face something he had not questioned in a very long time. "It was necessary," he said, the words controlled, steady, but lacking the certainty they once carried. Emily shook her head slightly, not rejecting him, not challenging him, just refusing the idea itself. "He is a child," she said again, softer this time, but somehow stronger, and this time the words did not echo in the room. They settled, they stayed, and Lucian did not answer, because for the first time he did not have one. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching between them like something alive, something that refused to be ignored. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, his fingers tracing the edge of the plate, as if he was memorizing it, as if this moment could disappear at any second and he needed to hold on to it in the only way he knew how. Emily watched him, her chest tightening again, not from fear this time, but from recognition, because she had done the same thing once, long ago, sitting at a table that was never meant for her, wondering how long it would last before someone told her to leave. "You can eat as much as you want," she said gently, sliding another piece of bread closer to him, and Ethan looked up, surprised, like the offer itself was something new, something he had not been taught to expect. "Really?" he asked, and the word was so quiet it almost disappeared. Emily nodded, a small, certain motion. "Really," she repeated, and that was enough. Ethan reached for the bread again, slower this time, more certain, and across the table Lucian watched it all unfold. Every detail, every shift, every small change that should not have mattered but did. More than anything else he had seen in years, his gaze lingered on his son's hands, on the way they no longer hesitated, on the way the tension in his shoulders had eased, and something inside him tightened in response. Not pain, not anger, but something unfamiliar, something that did not fit within the structure he had built around himself. He was taught discipline, Lucian said after a moment, his voice quieter now, as if the words themselves required more effort than before. Emily glanced at him, her expression steady. "Discipline is not the same as being alone," she replied, and the simplicity of it landed harder than any argument ever could. Lucian did not respond immediately, his eyes shifting slightly as if he were considering. Something he had long ago decided was not worth questioning. Ethan looked between them again, his small brow furrowing. "Did I do something wrong before?" he asked, and this time there was something else in his voice, not just uncertainty, but the beginning of understanding, the kind that comes too early, the kind that no child should have to carry. Emily felt it like a weight pressing against her ribs. "No," she said again, more firmly now, leaning slightly closer so he could see it in her face. "You did nothing wrong, not then, not now." And Ethan held her gaze for a second longer before nodding. A small motion, but one that seemed to settle something inside him. Lucian exhaled slowly, the sound almost imperceptible, but enough to mark a shift, his attention returning to Emily, studying her in a way that was no longer distant, no longer detached, but focused, searching. "You speak as if you understand," he said, and there was no accusation in his tone, only curiosity. Emily hesitated for just a moment, not because she was afraid, but because the answer mattered. "I do," she said finally, her voice quiet but certain. "I used to eat alone too." The words were simple, almost unremarkable, but they carried something deeper, something that did not need explanation, and Lucian saw it, felt it in the way her posture remained steady, in the way she did not look away, in the way she treated his son without hesitation, without calculation, and for the first time, the distance between them felt smaller, not in space, but in something harder to define, something that did not follow rules or titles or centuries of control. Ethan leaned slightly against the table, finishing another bite, his movements slower now, calmer, as if he no longer felt the need to rush, and that small change, that quiet shift, echoed louder than anything else in the room, because it was proof of something Lucian had never accounted for, something he had never allowed. And now that it was there, undeniable, he could not ignore it, he could not dismiss it, and more than that, he could not understand why it felt like something he had been missing all along. The realization did not arrive all at once. It crept in, quiet and persistent, settling into the spaces Lucian had long ago closed off, and for the first time in centuries, he did not push it away. He stood there, watching his son eat, watching the small, ordinary act unfold, as if it were something rare, something fragile, something he did not fully understand but could not ignore. Ethan's movement had slowed even more now, no longer rushed, no longer uncertain. He chewed carefully, almost thoughtfully, as if each bite carried meaning, beyond the food itself, and every few seconds his eyes flicked up, not to the room, not to the doors, but to Emily, checking, confirming, making sure this moment was still allowed, and each time she gave the same small nod, the same quiet reassurance. And that was enough to keep him grounded, to keep him there, present, Lucian noticed it all, every glance, every shift, every silent exchange that passed between them without words. And something inside him tightened again, but not in resistance, not in control. This time it felt closer to something else, something unfamiliar, something that made him question the structure he had trusted for so long. Why him? He asked suddenly, the question directed at Emily, but carrying something deeper beneath it, something unspoken. Emily looked up, caught off guard for only a second before answering. Because he asked, she said, simple, direct, and again, completely outside the logic of his world. Lucian's gaze lingered on her, studying the absence of calculation in her response, the lack of hesitation, the way she did not weigh consequences before acting, and that unsettled him more than defiance ever could. Many have asked for things, he said. Slowly, they were not given. Emily tilted her head slightly, considering his words. Were they children? She asked, and the question landed with quiet precision, not challenging, not accusing, just honest. And Lucian did not answer right away, because the truth was not something he had needed to consider before. Ethan shifted again, his plate now nearly empty, his small hands resting beside it, as if he did not know what to do next, the moment stretching in front of him, uncertain again. Emily noticed immediately, reaching for another piece of bread, placing it gently in front of him without a word, and Ethan looked at it, then at her and smiled, not wide, not loud, but real, and that expression, that single, unguarded moment, broke through something Lucian had not realized was still there, a memory, faint and distant, of a time when expressions like that had not been rare, had not been something to observe from a distance, but something to be part of. He exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering for just a fraction of a second before returning to the present, to the table, to the boy, to the woman who had altered everything without even trying. You are not afraid, he said, and it was not a question. Emily shook her head slightly, her voice steady. Not of him, she said, glancing briefly at Ethan before looking back at Lucian, and something in that answer shifted the balance again, subtle but undeniable, because fear had always been the foundation of the distance he maintained, the reason no one crossed the lines he had drawn, and yet here she was, standing within those lines, unaffected, unchanged, and that forced him to confront something he had not expected, that perhaps the distance had not been necessary in the way he believed, that perhaps it had been something else entirely. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his shoulders relaxed now, his eyes half-focused, as if he were finally content, and the sight of it, simple as it was, settled heavily in Lucian's chest, not as a burden, but as a realization, quiet and impossible to ignore, that something so small, so ordinary, had been absent for far too long, and now that it was here, he could not look away from it. The quiet did not feel fragile anymore. It felt heavy, like something settling in a place that could not be undone. Ethan rested his hands on the table, his plate nearly empty now, and for the first time since he had walked in, he did not look like he was waiting to be told to leave. He looked comfortable, small shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, and that single change echoed louder than anything else that had happened. Emily noticed it immediately, the way his breathing had slowed, the way he leaned slightly toward the warmth of the table instead of shrinking back from it. And she smiled, a small, soft expression that did not demand attention, did not ask for anything in return. It was simply there, offered without condition, and Ethan returned it, hesitant at first, then certain, and that was when Lucian felt it, not as a thought, not as a decision, but as something deeper, something shifting beneath the surface of everything he had believed was unchangeable. He had built his world on distance, on control, on the idea that strength required separation, that attachment weakened judgment, that denying simple comforts would prepare his son for something greater, something necessary. But as he stood there watching, none of that seemed to align with what he was seeing now, because what he saw was not weakness, not distraction, but something else entirely, something steadier, something that did not fracture under pressure, but softened it, reshaped it, made it bearable. You are changing something you do not understand, a voice said from the doorway, low, measured, and unwelcome in its timing. Lucian did not turn immediately, but Emily did, her attention shifting toward the sound, her posture tensing just slightly as she became aware that the moment they had been holding onto was no longer contained. A figure stepped forward, composed, controlled, his presence carrying the same weight as the others who had left, but sharper now, more deliberate. "This is not how it is done," he continued, addressing Lucian, though his eyes flicked briefly toward Emily, assessing, calculating. "It was never meant to be." The words were not loud, but they pressed into the space like a boundary being redrawn. Ethan looked up again, the ease in his expression faltering just slightly, as if he recognized the shift even without understanding it. Emily felt it too, the way the air tightened again, the way the fragile calm began to crack under something older, something more rigid. But Lucian remained still, his gaze still on his son, as if the interruption had not yet earned his attention. "He is learning the wrong lesson," the man said, and this time there was no attempt to soften it, no attempt to disguise the meaning behind the words. And that was when Lucian turned, slowly, deliberately, his expression unreadable, but his presence unmistakable. The room seemed to hold its breath again, waiting, expecting the restoration of order, the return to what had always been. But when he spoke, his voice carried something new, something that had not been there before. "He is learning," Lucian said, and the simplicity of it cut deeper than any argument because it did not defend, it did not justify, it simply stated. And for a moment, the man had no response, the certainty in his posture faltering just enough to be noticed. Emily glanced between them, sensing the shift, the fragile balance, tilting in a direction no one had anticipated. Ethan's small hand moved slightly across the table, resting near the edge as if he was grounding himself, as if he was holding onto the only thing that felt real in that moment. And Lucian saw it, every small movement, every quiet sign of trust that had formed in such a short time, and something inside him settled, not fully, not completely, but enough to make one thing clear, that whatever this was, whatever had begun here tonight, it was not something he was willing to dismiss. Not anymore. The air shifted again, but this time it did not tighten, it sharpened, like a line being drawn that could not be stepped back from. The man at the doorway held his ground, his gaze steady, unyielding, as if he carried the weight of every rule that had ever been followed in this place. And he expected it to hold, expected it to be enough. "If this continues," he said carefully, "it will not remain contained." His eyes moved briefly toward Emily again, not with anger, but with something colder, something more precise. "She is already affecting him." And the words settled into the space like a warning, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Ethan's fingers curled slightly against the table, his small body tensing as if he could feel the shift even if he did not understand it. Emily noticed immediately, her hand moving closer to his without touching, a quiet reassurance, a silent promise that he was not alone in this moment. And that simple gesture did more than any argument could have, because Lucian saw it, the instinctive protection, the absence of fear, the way she chose to stay instead of step back, and something inside him aligned with that choice before he could stop it. "Enough," Lucian said, his voice low but absolute, and the single word cut through everything else. The man at the doorway paused just for a fraction of a second, as if measuring whether to continue, whether to push further, but Lucian's gaze held, steady and unyielding, and for the first time, it was not the cold authority of a ruler. It was something else, something rooted in a decision that had already been made. "You were allowing sentiment to interfere," the man said more quietly now, but still firm. This is not how he was meant to be raised. Lucian did not look away, did not retreat into the certainty he had always relied on. Instead, he stepped closer to the table, the movement deliberate, closing the distance he had maintained for so long. And Ethan looked up, surprise flickering across his face, as if he had not expected his father to move toward him. Not like this, not without distance, not without instruction. "Then perhaps," Lucian said slowly, his voice steady, but carrying something deeper beneath it. "It was never meant to be this way. The words did not rise, did not demand attention, but they landed with a finality that left no room for argument. The man at the doorway went still, the certainty in his posture breaking just enough to be seen, because this was not defiance, not rebellion. It was a shift in foundation, a fracture in something that had stood unchanged for far too long. Emily felt it, the weight of that moment, the way everything seemed to pause around it, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would come next. Ethan's hand moved again, this time reaching slightly forward, not toward the food, but toward the space between him and his father, uncertain, hesitant, but present. And Lucian saw it, every small movement, every quiet attempt at connection that had never been allowed before. And for a moment, just a moment, he hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of unfamiliarity, because this was not a command, not a structure he could rely on. This was something else entirely, something that required a different kind of strength, a different kind of understanding. And then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out, not fully, not completely, but enough, his hand resting on the edge of the table, closer than it had ever been. And Ethan stilled, his breath catching just slightly as he realized what that meant. Not fully, not yet, but enough to feel it, enough to know that something had changed. And this time, no one in the room spoke, because there was nothing left to say, only something new beginning to take shape in the silence. The moment did not end. It unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if the world itself was learning how to breathe differently. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on his father's hand resting on the edge of the table. Not touching, not yet, but closer than it had ever been. And for a child who had spent years measuring distance, that small shift felt enormous. His fingers moved again, hesitant but drawn forward by something stronger than doubt, until they rested just inches away, close enough to feel warmth, close enough to know it was real. And he stopped there, as if waiting, as if giving Lucian the choice he had never been given before. Emily watched quietly, her presence steady, her silence intentional, because she understood something neither of them could yet put into words, that this moment was not about instruction, not about rules, but about permission, the kind that could not be forced, only accepted. Lucian's gaze lowered, not in weakness, but in focus, in awareness of something fragile and unfamiliar unfolding. Right in front of him, something he could not command, could not control, only respond to. And for a fraction of a second, the weight of centuries pressed against that choice, every lesson, every rule, every reason he had held on a distance, all of it standing between him and that small, waiting hand. But then something else rose, quieter but stronger, the memory of what he had just seen, the way his son had smiled, the way his shoulders had relaxed, the way something simple had changed. Everything, and slowly, carefully, Lucian moved his hand forward, closing the space between them, not grasping, not holding, just enough to touch, just enough to acknowledge. And Ethan's breath caught a soft, almost silent sound, but filled with something that had been missing for far too long. He did not pull away, did not question it. He simply stayed there, his small hand resting against his father's, and in that contact, something settled. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to change the shape of everything that came after. The man at the doorway did not speak again, because there was nothing left to argue, no rule strong enough to undo what had just been chosen. Emily exhaled quietly, a tension she had not realized she was holding easing just slightly. But she did not move, did not interrupt, because she knew this was not her moment to guide. It was theirs to discover. Lucian's expression did not soften in the way others might expect. It did not break into warmth or visible change. But something behind his eyes shifted, something subtle but undeniable, like a door that had been closed for too long, finally opening just enough to let something through. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had ever been, not commanding, not distant, but present. "You may sit here," he said, not as a rule, not as a condition, but as a choice. And Ethan nodded, a small, certain motion, as if he had been waiting for those words his entire life. The room remained silent. But it was no longer heavy, no longer tense. It was something else now, something steadier, something that did not need to be held together by control. And as Emily stepped back just slightly, giving them space without leaving entirely, She felt it too. That quiet shift, that simple, powerful truth settling in a place. That sometimes the smallest kindness does not just change a moment, it changes everything that comes after.